The uncertainty over the long-term fate of NATO has stepped up pressure on other efforts to defend against an increasingly aggressive Russia. With Moscow's war in Ukraine at its doorstep, the European Union is making plans to bring together the forces of member states, but there is a question over whether it will be able to see such plans through.
One thing has become clear in Brussels since Donald Trump returned to office. European defense must become more independent from its transatlantic partner.
450 million European Union citizens should not have to depend on 340 million Americans to defend ourselves against 140 million Russians who cannot defeat 38 million Ukrainians.
The EU needs military power to act as a credible deterrent to Russia, experts say. But that's no easy task when faced with 27 separate national armies and a variety of different weapon systems. As a comparison, there are 17 battle tanks used across the EU, where the US has 1. EU states operate 29 destroyers and frigates, the US uses 4. Where the EU has around 20 different types of fighter planes, the US has 6. This fragmentation also has an impact on the scale of weapons produced in Europe. And most EU member states have been accused of not investing enough in their national armies. Now, the EU wants to change that. The plans for defense independence include mobilizing 800 billion euros, roughly $920 billion, for the EU's defense infrastructure, strengthening European military capabilities, and enhancing common procurement of defense goods and cooperation among member states. As long as the division of labor is clear, these plans are good news for NATO, the transatlantic alliance, says its former official Jamie Shea.
NATO formulates the plans, NATO does the exercises, NATO makes sure that Europe is ready. But somebody has to provide the money, obviously, to pay for all of this and to ramp up defence production and to make sure that critical supply chains are secure, located in Europe, to make Europe less vulnerable, of course, to external pressures. And that's the EU.
Out of the 27 EU member states, 23 are also NATO members. Altogether, the transatlantic alliance consists of 32 states, including the United States, Canada, the UK and Turkey. The US has traditionally held a leading role within NATO. While Donald Trump has called this into question and left their allies in a state of uncertainty, Europeans remain dependent on the US.
The United States has not only big troops, but it also has specific capacities that no single European country has and could provide. That is transport helicopters, transport capacity, that's satellites, that's specific rockets. So Europe misses actually some technology, and it misses personnel, and it misses the strategic leadership that the US provides.
Economist Guntram Wolf says the discussion should be less focused on money, but more on efficiency. In particular, the US wants to see all NATO members spending 5% of their GDP for defense in the future. But former NATO official Shea says Europe would benefit more from a long-term vision of where the US wants to go with NATO, instead of the mixed messaging coming from Washington.
If Trump would tell us, look guys, this is my vision of NATO in 20 years, this is where we will remain engaged, this is where we're going to draw down, it would be very easy for the Europeans to then say, well, the Americans are going to provide missile defence, fine, so we'll concentrate on armoured personnel carriers or long-range artillery.
With more clarity, Europeans could invest in areas where they need to be more self-reliant, Shea says. In the short term, European states will remain dependent on the US for their defense. But a shift in thinking has begun.